In the quiet corners of forgotten ledgers, numbers do not simply misalign, they multiply, whispering of children who were never meant to be counted. In the summer of 1850, when census takers fanned out across the backroads of rural Indiana, their work was meant to be dry, methodical, forgettable. They knocked on doors, counted heads, wrote names, marked ages, and moved on. But among the ledgers preserved in the county courthouse, tucked between pages, yellowed by time and brittle with mildew, lies a single entry that refuses to settle into ordinary record-keeping. It was the household of Thomas and Eliza Harrow, a couple well known to be childless after nearly 20 years of marriage. Their farm lay on the edge of the Wabash Woods, half-cleared land, and a house so modest the census man, a clerk named Matthew Reeve, almost passed it by. When he did step through their gate, he wrote something that would puzzle archivists for decades. 3 infants, unnamed. The column for age was filled with 3 identical marks, each less than 1 year. The box for relation to head of household simply bore the word child, repeated 3 times. And yet, in the margin, squeezed tight against the page's edge, Reeve scrawled a note unlike any of his other professional comments. Counted thrice, but only one seen. His handwriting was unsteady. The ink blotched as though his pen shook. No explanation followed. He signed his name and turned the page. At first, researchers dismissed it as error, the kind that arises after a long day of tallying names in cramped parlors and dark kitchens. But when other accounts of the Harrow farm emerged, doubt deepened. Neighbors recalled visiting the couple in that year, seeing only a single cradle by the hearth, a cradle that rocked with a steady rhythm, though neither Thomas nor Eliza ever touched it. Visitors claimed the air inside the house seemed crowded, thick, as though more lives occupied the space than the eye could register. By winter, whispers spread in the township that the Harrows were never alone at night. Lamps burned in their upstairs window until dawn, and some swore they heard the voices of infants overlapping, laughter threading with cries, though when they entered the house, only one child was ever present. The preacher's wife claimed she baptized a son, but her husband insisted he had christened 3. Both told the story to their dying day, each refusing to cede their version. What unsettles most is not that one census man wrote what he believed he saw, but that he chose to preserve both truths side by side, a column with 3 living children, and a note that only one could be counted by sight. The ledger remains on file, its ink unfaded where others have browned, as if something pressed harder on the page that day. Error or deliberate omission? To this day, historians disagree. Families in that county still say the Harrows raised 1 boy. But if you count the graves behind their farmhouse, there are 3 small markers, all carved with the same year, none bearing a name. The record begins plainly enough, a county register from 1854 in the Indiana backcountry, noting the delivery of 3 infants to a woman named Clara Fitch. The entry sits among the usual litany of births and deaths, but what sets it apart is not the number. It was not unheard of for triplets to arrive in those years. Though survival was rare, but the midwife's sworn testimony appended at the bottom. In a looping, deliberate hand she wrote, "I was alone at the bedside." One mother, 3 children, born in succession, and each not alike. It was the kind of statement no official wanted in a ledger meant for taxes and records. Yet the clerk did not strike it through. Instead, he underlined it twice and filed it away. Neighbors remembered Clara as a quiet woman, neither beautiful nor plain, the sort who drew no gossip until the night of her labor. She was said to have cried for 3 days without pause, her voice breaking into strange cadences as though someone else answered from within. When the midwife arrived, she found the house filled with a bitter, metallic scent, the air sharp enough to sting the tongue. The birth itself was long, brutal, and the woman nearly tore herself apart before the first infant emerged, pale-skinned and dark-eyed. Moments later, another came, ruddy and sharp-featured, already howling. The third lingered, still as stone until dawn, and when he finally slid into the world, he bore flaxen hair and eyes so light they looked white in the candle flame. The midwife wrote it all down, compelled by something stronger than discretion. By morning, the town was already whispering. Some swore Clara had courted 3 men in the same season, one a farmer's son, one a traveling peddler, and one a cousin from Kentucky who disappeared soon after. Others claimed she had never lain with any man at all, that the children had chosen their faces from the shadows at her window. The preacher declared the birth a sign of judgment, a reminder that bloodlines twisted when God's law was ignored. The school teacher who lodged nearby told a darker tale that he heard 3 distinct voices crying in the night before any child had yet been born. The infants survived against every expectation, though they seldom shared the same crib. Visitors noticed Clara shifting them constantly, separating one from another as though they could not abide touching skin. The midwife herself avoided the Fitch farm after that, claiming she felt outnumbered even in an empty room. The ledger remains in the courthouse still, the page brittle, the ink black as if written yesterday. 3 births, 1 mother, no father listed. Only a margin note added later by an unknown hand, a single question that lingers even now. Whose are they? In the archives of a small county museum, there exists a faded photograph mounted on brittle cardstock, its corners eaten by mildew. The date etched on the back reads 1862, and beneath it, in elegant but fading script, are the words, Miss Godfrey's class. The photograph shows 24 children seated in stiff rows outside a clapboard schoolhouse, their faces solemn, their hands folded. It would be unremarkable, another relic of a bygone era, except for the fact that 3 children appear twice. They sit in the front row, clear and distinct, their collars neatly pressed, their shoes laced. And yet, in the back, their faces appear again blurred, translucent, the shapes of their bodies slightly misaligned with the lines of the siding behind them. When the photograph first came to light, scholars insisted it must be the result of double exposure. Early cameras were prone to accidents. Glass plates reused or light leaking at the wrong moment could easily superimpose one image on another. But careful examination of the plate revealed no such evidence. The children's blurred forms were not merely shadows or ghosts of movement, they were whole if indistinct, as though something had tried to place them twice in the same scene. The teacher, Miss Godfrey, kept a diary that survived the war years, its leather warped, its ink browned by humidity. Within it, she made frequent complaints about her class lists. Roll call never balanced, she wrote on a spring morning. 24 names, 27 voices. She noted how the 3 siblings, the Brant children, always seemed to cause confusion. On some mornings, she counted them once and found them 3. On others, she counted them 3 and found them once. Even their desks seemed to multiply, pencils left in pairs, though only one child was seated. Visitors to the classroom noticed the same oddity. Parents claimed to see their children sitting in more than one place at once, though none dared say so aloud. A traveling preacher who came to bless the school described the sensation of being watched from 3 sets of eyes in the same skull. He refused to enter the building again. The photograph itself became a curiosity. Some townsfolk claimed if you stared long enough, the blurred figures in the back began to sharpen, revealing small details, the tilt of a head, the smudge of a smile that matched perfectly the children in the front row. Others swore the blurred faces moved when the room was dark, turning slowly until they looked straight out of the picture. Miss Godfrey resigned the following year. Her final diary entry spoke not of lesson plans or grades, but of a dread she could not name. I count them, and still they are not counted. I dismiss them, and still they remain. The Brant children left no further trace in the records. No marriage certificates, no death notices, only a single photograph that insists they were present twice. The glass plate lies under lock, and yet even now, archivists say the blurred faces have grown darker with time, as if solidifying, as if waiting. In the Kansas township of Pawnee, 1869, the birth of twins to Margaret and Silas Wren was recorded without ceremony, just another set of names added to the county log. The girl was named Liza, the boy, Ephraim. They entered the world on the same hour, cried together, nursed together, and for a time, nothing set them apart but the color of their eyes. By their second year, however, neighbors began to whisper. Liza was growing steadily, her legs long, her voice loud. Ephraim, though born her equal, seemed smaller with each passing season. At first, it was explained away by sickness, by frailty, by the doctor's muttered words about weak constitution. But by the time Liza could run across the fields and call her brother to follow, Ephraim's clothes were looser than the year before, his shoes slipping from his feet. The family tried to keep it quiet. They dressed him in layers, sat him on high stools, and claimed he was just slight. But in towns that small, secrets rot fast. By the time both children reached 10, Liza stood tall enough to brush her head on the lintel, while Ephraim had withered to the size of a kindergartner, his voice deep, his words too measured for a child's. He spoke of things he could not have known harvests from years before his birth, names of men who had died in the war, hymns sung in languages none in the township could identify. When the pastor asked him how he knew such things, Ephraim simply replied, "Because I remember." His parents clung to hope that medicine might explain it. Doctors came from Wichita, even from as far as St. Louis, poking, measuring, writing notes in nervous hands. One declared it a case of reverse development. Another called it symbiotic regression. None returned a second time. The more Ephraim shrank, the older he seemed to become. By 12, he barely reached his sister's waist, yet his skin was lined at the eyes, his hands knotted with veins like twine. He carried himself with the patience of a man who had seen too much. Neighbors began to avoid the Wren farm. They said Ephraim's gaze was heavy, that when he fixed his eyes on you, it felt like a reckoning. School children ran from him, whispering that his shadow did not match his body, that sometimes it lagged behind as if reluctant to follow. Liza defended him fiercely, but even she confessed once to a friend that when Ephraim spoke in the dark, it was not with a boy's voice. In the fall of that year, Margaret Wren came to the courthouse alone. She begged the clerk not to list Ephraim on the next census. "He is still with us," she said, "but he is not ours anymore. No record of his death was ever filed, and no grave bears his name." Yet the ledger of the township contains a strange notation beside the family line. 2 born, 1 grown, 1 returned. It remains unexplained, another unsolved entry in the long margins of rural America. The story of Dr. Nathaniel Kettering begins not in the farmhouse where he vanished, but in the letterhead of the Indiana State Medical Society. In the spring of 1871, they dispatched him to Crawford County to investigate a family said to be abundant in children and lacking in separation. The phrase puzzled the committee, but it was clear enough. Rumors of something unnatural among the offspring of Elias and Ruth Whitcomb had stirred such unease that the matter was given to science rather than scripture. Dr. Twelfthey I. Kettering, respected for his rational mind and meticulous notes, traveled by rail, then by carriage, and finally on foot to the Whitcomb farmstead, where 8 children were said to sleep under a single roof. His first letters home were calm, if unsettled. "The house is warm," he wrote, "but too quiet for so many souls. 8 children at table, yet they do not speak above a whisper. Their eyes fix upon me with the steadiness of watchmen. I feel measured." In his next report, he described their peculiar stillness. Though of differing ages, some said to be as old as 12, others hardly more than toddlers, they seemed to move in rhythm, rising from chairs in unison, setting spoons to bowls as if timed. The most disturbing detail appeared in the 3rd letter. "I placed my ear to the chest of one, a boy of perhaps 8. I heard the pulse steady and strong. But when I turned to another, and then another, the sound did not differ. It was not many heartbeats, but one rhythm, carried through them all. By the fourth letter, Kettering's language had shifted. He admitted the impossibility of his findings, yet insisted on their truth. He spoke of lying awake at night in the guest room, hearing a faint thrum that seemed to pass beneath the floorboards like water under ice. He claimed the children gathered at his door after midnight, standing silently in the hall, their chests rising and falling together, their breath shallow but synchronized. He wrote, "It is not that they share a heartbeat, it is that they are governed by it." The final letter arrived weeks later, scrawled in a hand that betrayed haste. The ink bled in places where his grip had faltered. "They are borrowing from me now," it read. "When I rest, I wake weaker. When I breathe, I feel them within the breath. Last night I counted only one shadow, though the hall was full." That was the last anyone heard from Dr. Nathaniel Kettering. When a constable finally reached the Whitcomb farm, the family was found intact, all 8 children seated at the table, their faces pale but calm. No trace of the doctor remained save for his satchel, left open on the porch, containing a stethoscope and an unfinished note. The page bore only 2 words before the ink trailed away. "Not mine." The parish of St. Ignatius in rural Maine was no stranger to hardship. Built of stone quarried from the riverbank and timber dragged in from black pine woods, it had weathered blizzards, fire, and famine. Yet the story that lingered longest in its pews was not of storms or wars, but of a baptism that would not take. In 1877, 3 infants were carried into the church, swaddled in lace, their mother pale from the labor that nearly claimed her life. They were the Colburn triplets, born against odds so steep that neighbors called them a miracle before they had taken their first breath. The congregation gathered to see them consecrated, eager for proof that blessings still fell upon the valley. The service began like any other. Hymns rang out, candles guttered in the draught, and the priest, Father Matthias, a man gray with age but steady in hand, lifted the silver pitcher and poured water into the baptismal font. Witnesses swore it was clear and cold, freshly drawn from the well outside, yet as soon as it touched the basin the water began to shiver. When the first child was brought forward, the priest dipped his fingers and raised them above the infant's brow, but the drops would not cling. They rolled away as if repelled, sliding from skin without wetting it. Startled, he tried again, scooping water and pressing it down, only to see it bead and scatter across the floor. The congregation murmured uneasily. Some claimed they saw steam rising from the children's skin, though the air was cool. Others said the surface of the font rippled violently each time the priest reached in, as though resisting his hand. With the second child, the effect grew stronger. The water seemed to leap away before it even touched her, spilling down her swaddling cloth like rain striking glass. A woman in the front pew fainted. By the time the third infant was placed before him, Father Matthias was trembling. He attempted once more to speak the words, but his voice broke. The water hissed when it neared the child's face, sliding off as though meeting oil. The silence in the church deepened into fear. Some whispered that these were not human children, that no miracle of God bore fruit in threes. Others muttered of curses, of bargains struck. The priest himself dropped the pitcher, its clang echoing like a bell tolling. He left the font where it stood, water spilling down the altar steps, and fled the building without removing his vestments. He did not return for Mass the next week, nor any week after. Within the month, Father Matthias left the county entirely, his quarters abandoned, his books scattered as if dropped mid-packing. The Colburn family raised their children in silence after that, rarely attending service, never speaking of the day. Yet people in the town remembered. They said the triplets never wept, never sickened, never seemed touched by weather at all. They walked through rain dry, through snow warm. And though they lived long into adulthood, their names never appeared again in the parish rolls, as if the church itself refused to claim them. The record in the 1874 burial ledger of Crittenden County, Kentucky, is plain at first glance. 3 siblings are listed: Sarah, aged 9, Jonah, aged 7, and Ruth, aged 4. Their cause of death is given as consumption, the catch-all for wasting illness that scythed through whole households. The column for place of interment notes a single plot, marked by the number 47. It should have been a routine entry, tragic but unremarkable, except that those who dug the grave swore they lowered only one body into the earth. The story passed down through the gravediggers is precise. The coffin arrived from the carpenter's shop larger than any they had seen for children, broad at the shoulders, heavy enough that 6 men strained to carry it. Its lid was secured, not with the usual brass screws, but with a row of thick iron nails hammered flush into the wood. The undertaker gave no explanation, only a warning. It was not to be opened once sealed. Still, one worker remembered how the boards seemed to thrum faintly when touched, as though something within shifted against the grain. At the grave, the men braced themselves for 3 small bodies. But when the lid was briefly lifted to settle the coffin rope, they saw only one child laid inside. She or it was dressed in white, her face half veiled, her limbs tucked as though asleep. Yet the plaque fixed to the lid bore 3 names: Sarah, Jonah, Ruth. 1 coffin, 1 body, 3 memorials. When questioned, the undertaker muttered that the family had requested it so. But no one could recall seeing the parents at the burial, nor at church before or after. The children had appeared on the school rolls one year, and then disappeared from them the next, without note. Those who witnessed the burial recalled the air turning thick as the coffin was lowered. Birds that had been roosting nearby fell silent. The priest stumbled over the names, repeating Sarah twice, forgetting Ruth altogether until prompted. When the last spade of soil was pressed down, the ground seemed to settle deeper than usual, as though swallowing more than was given. That night, one of the gravediggers claimed he dreamed of 3 voices calling from beneath the earth, braided together in a single cadence. The grave still stands in the old cemetery, its marker carved with 3 names on 1 stone. Weather has worn them, but the inscription remains legible. Visitors leave 3 offerings, 3 flowers, 3 coins, 3 candles, though only 1 mound lies beneath. Scholars have since debated clerical confusion, misrecorded deaths, or a family too poor to purchase multiple coffins. Yet among locals, another explanation persists, that 3 lives had returned to 1 body, bound by iron nails to keep them from parting again. Between 1,854 and 1,929, thousands of children rode the orphan trains that carried the unwanted and abandoned from eastern cities to far-flung farmsteads of the American Midwest. Their names were inked in ledgers, their faces inspected at depot stops, their futures bound to the hands that claimed them. For most, the records are tidy, though tinged with sorrow. But in the year 1886, a series of reports unsettled even the most pragmatic clerks. Siblings who arrived in Kansas and Nebraska had doubled in number, as though the trains had delivered more children than they carried away. The first account comes from a placement agent in Topeka, who swore he had checked the roster thrice before departure. 2 sisters, Mary and Louise Dern, ages 6 and 8, boarded in New York. When the train pulled into Kansas, 4 children stepped down bearing the same surname, each with the same pale eyes and cleft chin. The agent insisted there had been only 2, but townsfolk swore they saw 4 descend, hands clasped, silent as stone. The families who took them in kept their doubts to themselves, but notes scribbled in margins reveal the same refrain. They came off the train, but not on it. Similar cases followed. In Missouri, a farmer received 3 brothers, though only one had been promised. In Oklahoma, twins were expected, but 4 identical children appeared, their clothing mismatched as if cobbled together at haste. The railroad men who crewed the trains denied it all, claiming the numbers matched at departure and arrival alike. But diaries kept by receiving families whispered otherwise. One woman wrote that the extra boy who came into her care never ate, yet he never wasted away. Another claimed her doubled daughter cast no shadow when she played in the barn. The phenomenon was never publicly addressed by the Children's Aid Society, though privately their correspondence grew frantic. One letter between agents in Indiana spoke of duplication in transit and warned not to separate the extras from their counterparts. "They are tethered," it read. "To sever is to sicken them both." Yet evidence suggests separations happened. In one case, a doubled sibling placed with a distant household was returned within weeks, the family insisting he never spoke, never slept, only stood by the door at dusk as though waiting for someone unseen. By the turn of the century, the record smoothed over the anomalies. Ledger lines were struck through, names corrected, numbers balanced on paper if not in truth. But among those who still tell the stories, the memory lingers. Children stepping down from trains in greater numbers than they boarded, clutching tickets never issued, eyes fixed on horizons no one else could see. Families kept them, raised them, buried them. Yet some graves hold no bones at all, only markers inscribed with names of children who, by all official account, never existed until they arrived. In 1891, an auctioneer clearing the contents of a farmhouse outside Chillicothe, Ohio, came across a small leather-bound album tucked into a cedar chest. Its pages smelled faintly of iron, though he assumed at the time it was mildew. The cover bore no name, only the impression of 3 interlocking circles pressed into the leather. He sold it for pennies to a collector of curiosities, who later discovered why the family had likely left it behind. The album contained a series of cabinet photographs, all portraits of children posed stiffly against painted backdrops. Brothers in matching suits, sisters in lace, the sorts of images sent to relatives or tucked into parlors. Yet, as the collector examined them, he noticed a strange discoloration around the eyes. In some, the children appeared to be crying. In others, the stains spread downward like rivulets, darkening the edges of the paper. He at first assumed it was water damage, but the pattern repeated with unsettling precision, always beginning at the eyes, always running down the cheeks, never smudging the rest of the print. When left on his mantel, the stains deepened over time, as if the photographs themselves continued to weep. Visitors swore they saw the paper glisten faintly, a wetness that never dried. One guest claimed she heard a faint dripping sound, though no water was present. Disturbed, the collector wrapped the album and stored it in his attic, where it remained until his death decades later. In the 1960s, the album resurfaced during an estate sale and found its way into the hands of a university archivist. Scientific tests were performed on the stains. To the astonishment of the lab, the substance was not ink, nor mold, nor any known pigment, it was human blood. Type O, the most common, but undeniably real. The conclusion was hushed, never published, though copies of the report circulated quietly among staff. Local historians dug further into the family's past. The farmhouse where the album was found had once belonged to the Withers line, a family known for producing large sets of children, many of whom died young. Census records list names that appear beneath the photographs in faint pencil: Sarah, Joseph, Clara, and Ruth, though no grave markers for those children exist. Rumors spread that the family never buried their young properly, that the album became their reliquary, a vessel to contain what was left when the bodies were gone. The album is said to still exist, locked away in a special collections vault. Staff rarely bring it out, and when they do, they claim the stains remain damp to the touch, smearing fingers red for an instant before fading. Visitors describe an unease, a sense of being watched by the eyes on the page, as though the siblings within never forgave the world for forgetting them. Some whisper the photographs are not simply portraits, but mirrors capturing children twice, once in image, and once in something far more enduring, something that still bleeds. The tale of the Greaves triplets has lingered in the oral histories of Illinois for more than a century, told in lowered voices whenever the river runs high. Born in 1883 to a mill worker's wife, the 3 boys were said to be inseparable, identical in face and build, prone to moving together as if pulled by the same thought. Their mother dressed them alike. Their father claimed he often confused their voices, and townsfolk joked they were less three children than one soul divided. That joke turned brittle the summer of 1895. It was late July when the boys went swimming in the Sangamon River. The day was heavy with heat, the water swollen from recent rains. Witnesses remembered the triplets laughing as they leapt from the rocks, their voices blending into one. But before the hour was done, one of them failed to surface. The other two screamed until farmhands came running, dragging the body from the current. Efforts to revive him failed. His lips were blue, his chest still. The doctor pronounced him drowned, and by nightfall the family had laid him out in the parlor, candles flickering beside the small pine coffin. The wake drew neighbors from miles around. Some recalled the oppressive stillness of the room, the air damp and close, as though the river itself had followed the body indoors. The surviving brothers sat rigid at the foot of the coffin, silent, eyes fixed on their twin's face. Then, sometime near midnight, the candles guttered. A wet sound broke the hush, a faint trickle, like water slipping through floorboards. Those gathered swore they saw moisture pooling beneath the coffin, spreading dark across the boards. Before anyone could rise, the drowned boy sat up. Gasps and shrieks filled the parlor, but the child said nothing. His lips moved soundlessly, his eyes unfocused, and thin rivulets of water streamed steadily from his ears, pattering onto his shirt. The doctor present declared it impossible, tried to hold him down, but the boy's skin was cold, his chest did not rise, and still he remained upright. He walked from the coffin unaided and stood beside his brothers. They did not flinch, but from that night forward, neither of them spoke again. The family tried to continue life in quiet isolation, but rumors spread. At school, the triplets sat together, mute, while the one who had drowned seemed to follow lessons without need of voice. Children whispered that he never blinked, that he smelled faintly of silt. In church, the priest refused to baptize him again, declaring that the river has already claimed and returned him. No record exists of their adulthood. Census notes trail off, with the word present scrawled beside their names rather than ages. The house where they lived eventually collapsed into ruin. Yet locals claim that when the river swells in flood, three figures can be seen standing at its edge, one with water glistening endlessly down his cheeks, the others silent, their mouths forever closed. In the fall of 1892, a new student was enrolled at the one-room schoolhouse in Iron County, Missouri. His name was Samuel Cray, 9 years old, thin as a reed, with pale hair that always seemed damp at the roots. At first, nothing set him apart from the others, though the teacher, Miss Whitaker, noted in her diary that the boy spoke in the plural. When asked his name, he had replied, "We are Samuel." She corrected him gently, thinking it a childish affectation, yet the pattern persisted. Lessons revealed more unsettling traits. When called upon to recite his sums, he would answer not I, but we, and he always offered numbers that surpassed the problem. Asked how many apples remained after 2 were taken from 6, he declared, "We count 23. When pressed, he calmly explained that his brothers had carried the rest away. Miss Whitaker reminded him he had no brothers. The boy shook his head and said, 19. They sit behind you." At first, the other children laughed, but laughter faded when they began to hear faint whispers echoing after his words. When Samuel recited scripture, a murmur followed in chorus, 19 voices layered like wind through a hollow. Some children swore they felt warm breath on their necks, though no one stood close. By winter, half the class refused to sit near him. They claimed empty seats filled themselves when Samuel arrived, the wood creaking under unseen weight. The teacher wrote to his parents, but the Crays insisted Samuel was their only child. No brothers, no sisters, his father testified at the church meeting. The boy imagines things. Yet townsfolk began to doubt. At recess, Samuel would be seen alone in the yard, yet the snow bore dozens of prints around him, small and indistinct, circling as if in play. The minister attempted to pray over him, but Samuel interrupted with a calm voice. "We already pray." One entry in Miss Whitaker's diary describes the most chilling event. She had asked Samuel to write his family name on the board. Instead, he scrawled 19 surnames, all different, some unrecognizable, some belonging to families long buried in the county cemetery. When she tried to erase the chalk, the board seemed to bleed faint streaks of red, refusing to clear. The boy vanished from records not long after. One spring morning, his desk sat empty, though no one saw him leave. The ledger of attendance for that day bears a single word in Miss Whitaker's careful hand: absent. Yet beneath it, pressed faintly into the paper, are 19 smaller signatures written in no known script. The townsfolk later said Samuel did not disappear, he had merely finished counting. The story of the Harvest twins begins in the Dakota Territory during the blistering summer of 1889, when the sun burned the plains into dust and wells shrank to puddles of brackish mud. Crops failed across counties, cattle ribs showed through hide, and families whispered of leaving before winter set in. Yet amid the ruin, a farmer named Elias Dorn and his wife produced not only a harvest but 2 daughters, born under a waning moon. The same week their neighbors' fields withered black. The births were difficult, drawn-out labors that left the midwife shaken. She later confided that when she cut the cord of the first child, no blood flowed, only a thin stream of chaff, dry husks falling like brittle rain. The second girl arrived minutes later, and her cry rattled more than it soothed. Her lips split, releasing flecks of wheat kernel that clung to the midwife's apron. The women of the household swore to secrecy, but rumors spread nonetheless. The drought was blamed, then the mother's unnatural condition. Yet when the girls survived their first month, talk turned from fear to awe. For while neighboring farms lost acre after acre, the Dorns' wheat grew high and golden, but only after dusk. In daylight, the fields looked barren, soil cracked, stalks wilted. Yet under the cover of night, the plants stood tall, heavy with grain that shimmered faintly, as if brushed by moonlight. Neighbors who came to watch returned uneasy, claiming the stalks rustled in unison though no wind stirred, as if bending toward the farmhouse in silent worship. The twins themselves grew pale and thin, their veins faintly ridged like straw pressed beneath the skin. Scrapes and cuts produced no red but a scattering of husks and dust. By the time they could walk, they wandered barefoot into the fields after sunset, their small hands brushing the stalks as though guiding them. Families nearby refused to buy the Dorns' grain, yet when hunger grew too sharp, they took it anyway. Strange bread, they called it, for it filled the stomach yet left the mouth dry, as though swallowing smoke. When questioned by a preacher, Elias swore he had prayed as faithfully as any man, and that the Lord had answered him through his daughters. But the preacher's wife said otherwise. She dreamed of the girls standing in her parlor, mouths open, husks pouring endlessly onto the floor until the boards vanished beneath gold. The drought lifted years later, but the twins never left the farm. They were last seen as young women, standing at the edge of the midnight field, their hair caught with chaff, their dresses trailing lines of seed across the earth. Their graves, if they exist, were never marked. Yet locals claim the soil still yields a single patch of wheat each year, glowing faintly after sunset, as though watered not by rain but by memory. In the mining town of Scranton, Pennsylvania, 1894, shafts ran deep as wounds in the earth, and men descended each dawn knowing some would not return. Among them was the Donnelly family, Irish immigrants whose youngest, a boy of 12 named Aidan, worked the edges of the pits carrying water and tools. One autumn morning, a collapse struck while the men were below. Dust clouded the air, timbers cracked, and Aidan, who had been near the entry, vanished into the dark with them. For 2 days, his family searched among the survivors and the dead, but no trace of the boy was found. On the third night, as lanterns burned low in vigil, a figure appeared at the mouth of the mine. It was Aidan, dirty, pale, coughing, but alive. His mother wept and rushed to embrace him. Yet before her arms closed, another shape followed close behind. A second boy, identical in every detail, emerged from the shadows. Their faces were the same: the coal-streaked skin, the freckled nose, even the torn sleeve on the left arm. Both said the same thing in the same voice: "I am Aiden." The town froze. Neighbors whispered it must be exhaustion or shock. Yet no matter how they pressed the boys, neither relented. Each insisted he was the true son. They bore the same memory of falling timbers, the same scar on the knee from childhood, even the same dream of a dog chasing them through a meadow. When asked what they ate while trapped, they both replied, "Stone and shadow." The Donnelly family, poor and desperate, took them both in. But soon the strangeness grew unbearable. The brothers moved in perfect unison, turning their heads together, speaking at once as if rehearsed. At night, the household swore they heard whispers not of two voices, but of many, murmuring beneath the boys' breaths. The parish priest attempted to intervene, demanding one reveal himself as false. He placed a crucifix between them. Both recoiled, not in fear but in mirrored disgust, saying, "He would not choose between us." The town grew wary. Children avoided them in the street. Miners muttered that the collapse had split the boy's soul, leaving it doubled. Rumors thickened when livestock began dying in pairs: two calves stillborn on the same night, two hens found with their necks broken in identical fashion. Families whispered that the twins carried a curse, a balance that demanded symmetry. Years later, census records list two Aidens Donnelly, born the same year, residing in the same household. No further explanation is given. Their graves are harder to trace. Local lore insists they were buried side by side, identical stones unmarked but for a shared epitaph carved by their mother's hand. Returned twice, taken once. Some say on quiet evenings. Two boys still walk the abandoned shafts, voices echoing in unison, calling not for rescue but for recognition. By the closing decades of the 19th century, science sought to tame the uncanny with names and diagrams. The word chosen was chimerism, borrowed from myth, meant to suggest a body composed of more than one. Medical journals of the 1880s filled their pages with such cases. Infants born with two sets of teeth in a single jaw, children whose blood tested both A and O within the same vein, siblings who seemed to share organs across their separate bodies. Surgeons drew tidy sketches, labeled arteries and bones, and declared the phenomenon natural, though every report betrayed unease. One oft-cited article from 1883 described a girl in New Orleans who bled two colors: crimson from her left arm, rust dark from her right. Another case followed of a young boy in Minnesota whose chest bore two heartbeats, though only one organ could be found. Physicians argued over whether these were remnants of fused twins, or accidents of gestation, or simply clerical exaggerations. Yet while science debated, the families lived with the inexplicable. Diaries from mothers tell of children who wept in harmony with their dead siblings, or whose skin shifted tone in patches, as though pieces of another life rose to the surface. The journals maintained a careful distance. Chimerism, they repeated, as if the word itself explained the terror of watching a child's eyes change color mid-breath, or seeing a girl's hair grow half black, half blonde, in stripes that mirrored her lost twin. Surgeons attempted demonstrations before learned societies, producing children to be examined like curiosities. Audiences recoiled when one infant's blood pooled half-clotted on the table while the other half flowed freely, never stilling. What the papers omitted were the field reports, scribbled notes from country doctors, midwives, and parish priests who dealt with the cases beyond city hospitals. These accounts spoke not of anomalies but of multiplication, of children who seemed to belong to more than one lineage, who answered to more than one name. A midwife in Ohio swore she delivered a girl who bore her brother's birthmark across her chest, though the boy had died weeks earlier in the womb. A physician in Kentucky confessed he stopped treating a family altogether after their daughter began bleeding from her mouth each time her cousin fell ill. One surgeon wrote in frustration, "We can name it, but not understand it." The name promised order, but the children kept confounding it. By the century's end, chimerism became a word cited less for clarity than for containment, a category into which the inexplicable could be dropped like a stone into deep water. But those who had seen the children firsthand knew that a label did not still the whispers, nor stop the feeling that something older than science moved beneath the skin, knitting and dividing, remembering lives that should never have overlapped. The Macomb courthouse records of 1897 preserve one of the most baffling trials ever held in Illinois. The defendant, a farmhand named Thomas Greeley, stood accused of murdering his neighbor's son, a boy of 16 named Elijah Croft. Witnesses swore they saw Greeley strike the youth during a quarrel in the pasture, a blow delivered with the blunt end of a fence post. Elijah collapsed instantly, but what followed confounded both jury and town alike. When the sheriff's men went to retrieve the body, they returned with not one corpse but three. Each was Elijah, identical in face and stature, each dressed in the same torn shirt, each with boots caked in the same field mud, yet they bore different wounds. One skull was fractured at the temple, another chest caved inward as if crushed, the third throat opened from ear to ear. Neighbors, summoned to identify the body, gasped that all three were the Croft boy. Even his mother, brought weeping to the morgue, insisted she could not choose between them. "They are all my son," she cried, "but how can that be?" The coroner attempted to make sense of the matter. He inspected each body, taking notes on injuries, even cutting small samples of hair and blood. The findings, later read in court, confirmed each corpse bore the same birthmark on the inner thigh, the same crooked molar in the back jaw. "Not triplets," he muttered, "but one multiplied." The report was filed, though never published in medical journals for fear of ridicule. During the trial, Greeley maintained his innocence in part, but admitted one thing. "I struck him," he said, eyes wide. "But only once. The post landed true, I swear it. But when he fell, the ground split. And there were more of him than I ever saw in life." His words brought uneasy laughter at first, but laughter died when the sheriff confirmed the farmhand had not touched the other bodies, nor had anyone else. They seemed to have appeared in place, as though pulled from the air. The jury struggled with their verdict. How does one assign guilt when the crime itself defied reason? They convicted him of manslaughter in hopes of satisfying law, but the record shows doubt. The judge's closing remarks read, "One blow, 3 deaths. May Providence explain what law cannot." The Croft family buried the bodies in a single grave, the headstone marked not with dates but with 3 carved lines, side by side. Locals claimed the earth never settled properly there, always appearing freshly turned no matter the season. On quiet nights, some swear they hear 3 voices rising from the soil, speaking as one, each repeating the words of the killer himself. "I only struck once." The farmhouse stood on the outskirts of Carbon County, Pennsylvania, its timbers warped from decades of damp winters and heavy coal dust carried on the wind. It was in this house, in 1881, that the Wilkes family welcomed their first and only child. The birth was unremarkable, attended by a neighbor midwife who recorded nothing unusual beyond the infant's silence. He did not cry until dawn, as though waiting for something unseen. The cradle, crafted by the father's own hands, was placed in the attic room where the roof slanted low. At first, it was just wood and nails, no different from any other. By spring, neighbors began to notice the sound. At dusk, when the wind was still, the cradle rocked on its own. Not wildly, not with any sudden force, but steady, deliberate, like the slow rhythm of breathing. The Wilkes claimed it was nothing more than draft, yet those who visited swore the motion continued even when windows were nailed shut. More unsettling was what the cradle contained. Though only one child had been born into it, the bedding bore 3 distinct impressions: as though three infants had lain side by side, pressing their weight into the wood. No amount of smoothing erased the hollows. They returned by morning, deepened as the years passed. Word spread through the valley. Farmers refused to bring their children near the house. A hired girl quit after a single night, claiming she heard 3 heartbeats echoing in the attic boards, though only one child slept there. She described the sound as hollow, as if struck from inside the timber. The Wilks themselves confessed strange happenings in whispers. The boy would be found in the cradle's center, his arms spread wide, as if making room. Sometimes the cradle rocked without him in it, the blankets denting downward in places where no body lay. In 1884, a traveling doctor came to investigate. He tapped the cradle's frame, listening like one listens for rot, and swore he heard resonance unlike any wood he had known. "As if it carries a pulse," he muttered. His notes, later found in a drawer of the county records, ended with a single line: 3 but born as one kept in timber. The Wilkes boy grew pale, sickly, speaking often to corners where no one stood. By his 10th year, he claimed his brothers lived in the grain of the cradle and would one day climb free. The family left the farm soon after, abandoning the attic room. When neighbors entered months later, they found the cradle overturned, the floor beneath it worn smooth in 3 arcs, as if countless small hands had pushed against it from below. Some say the house still stands, though no one stays past nightfall. In silence, one can hear wood creak with the rhythm of 3 lives that never were, and a cradle rocking though no child lies within. In the 1870s, when lantern slide photography was a novelty carried in satchels by curious physicians and wandering lecturers, a man named Dr. Elias Rourke traveled the rural backroads of New England. He was no great name in medicine, though he fancied himself both healer and historian. His true obsession was documenting the families he treated, capturing on fragile glass the pale faces of children who rarely lived past their 5th year. His surviving notes describe the work as a census of bodies before the soil takes them. It was during these journeys that Dr. Rourke began to notice something unusual. In several households, when the lamp was set at the proper angle and the children posed stiffly in their Sunday clothes, the images produced shadows that did not align. One girl in Vermont, seated beside her brother, showed 2 silhouettes. One crisp and obedient to the light, the other elongated, bent at the head, as though it craned toward the boy. A farm family in Maine produced 3 children, each doubled on the plate, 6 shadows though only 3 bodies stood. Rourke wrote in his field journal, "They fracture under exposure. Their true number is not as the eye suggests." He compiled dozens of such slides, carrying them in padded boxes, sharing them in dim parlors to wide-eyed farmers who quickly regretted the invitation. "That ain't my boy's shape," one father muttered before smashing the lamp and demanding the doctor leave. Others whispered that the photographs caught something not meant for glass, that the children themselves grew restless after being captured, speaking in voices that seemed to echo one another. When Dr. Rourke died in 1881, his effects were catalogued for auction. Trunks of medical texts, jars of preserved tissue, and, most curiously, 3 cases of lantern slides. But the slides never reached the block. The record simply notes them: missing, presumed stolen. For decades, no one knew where they had gone. Until one plate surfaced, a single glass slide wrapped in cloth, discovered in the attic of a house once belonging to Rourke's kin. The image was faint, nearly rubbed away, but what remained showed 2 boys standing hand in hand, their faces blurred. Behind them stretched shadows that multiplied endlessly, thinning into the shape of a crowd. Stranger still were the marks on the plate itself, fine scratches along the emulsion. Curved and uneven, unmistakably human fingernails dragged from the inside of the glass outward, as though the shadows had clawed at their confinement. Scholars dismissed it as damage from storage, but the family who found it swore that when the plate was lifted to the light, the shadows within shifted ever so slightly, as if waiting for the lamp that once made them more than one. The traveling carnival that rolled into Missouri in the summer of 1903 promised wonders for a nickel. Snake charmers, painted clowns, and a strongman who could bend iron bars drew the curious from farms and towns alike. Yet the true draw, the whispered attraction that made mothers clutch their children closer, was the sideshow tent billed as the living riddle. Behind a canvas flap sat three triplets, identical in every feature, save for their eyes, which some swore did not match from one glance to the next. Their names were printed on the handbill Samuel, Silas, and Seth, but the crowd rarely agreed which was which, for the brothers seemed to change places without moving. The showman's pitch was practiced. He spoke of one body, three souls, of the miracle of nature that bends law itself. Inside the tent, the boys sat on wooden stools, pale, unsmiling, answering questions in unison with voices that rang a shade off, like a chord missing its root. Spectators reported seeing them finish one another's sentences backward, or mirror gestures with impossible precision. Some laughed, others prayed beneath their breath. The doctor who examined them swore their pulses beat at staggered rhythms, never aligning, as though each kept his own private clock. On the third night, the incident occurred. The tent was packed, lanterns hissing in the summer heat. Just as the showman began his usual introduction, the lights flickered, sputtered, and went out. Witnesses recalled the sudden dark like a sheet pulled over the world. Then came the sound first, a low vibration, as though the ground itself trembled, followed by a rattling shake that made the poles of the tent strain. Someone screamed, but their cry was drowned by a burst of laughter, high-pitched, layered, unmistakably childlike, and yet it came not from the stools but from somewhere above, circling like birds in rafters that did not exist. The lanterns burst back to life in an instant. Glass shattered, flame spattered against canvas, and chaos spread through the crowd. When order returned, the triplets were gone. The stools sat empty, the ropes that bound them cut clean through, ends frayed as if gnawed by teeth. The tentmaster swore he had seen three figures rise straight upward into the dark, not pulled, not lifted, but ascending on their own. His account was dismissed as hysteria, yet more than a dozen swore the same. Searches of the grounds turned up nothing. No bodies, no footprints, not even a scrap of clothing. The carnival folded within a week, its owner ruined by fear and gossip. But in the years after, those who had attended said that on certain nights, when lanterns flickered low, they could still hear laughter circling above their barns or attics, three voices weaving together, teasing, reminding all who heard that riddles are not solved by names, but by disappearance. In the winter of 1910, workers clearing the attic of a shuttered orphanage in Ohio stumbled upon a trunk bound with rusted iron straps. Inside, bundled by string and sorted by no clear order, were hundreds of letters written in a child's hand. At first glance, they appeared to be the usual notes of loneliness and small comforts, scribbled prayers for new shoes, stories of kittens glimpsed through fences, promises exchanged between dormitory beds. But the further the workers read, the stranger the letters became. Many were addressed not to fellow orphans but to siblings who, according to records, never existed. "Dear Anna," one letter began, "you will be born in the spring of 1927. When you come, do not look under the bed, for that is where they whisper." Another was written in the careful block print of a boy no older than 10. "Brother Paul, you will be taller than me, though I am not yet grown. Remember to hide the key in your left shoe." I could not. The postmarks only deepened the unease. Some bore dates decades in the future, inked by the same county stamp clerk who would not even be alive to press them. Scholars who later examined the trunk found the letters eerily consistent in tone, as if guided by a single unseen hand. The handwriting varied, some sloppy, others delicate, but the content circled the same themes: warnings, reminders, fragments of advice for lives not yet lived. One note, dated 1942, described a boy's fear of soldiers marching past the window, though the letter was penned in 1906 by a girl who died 2 years later of pneumonia. Another told of the triplets who knock from inside the glass, echoing stories whispered in entirely different counties. What puzzled researchers most was how the letters seemed to answer one another across decades. A child in 1895 wrote, "I dream you found the ribbon, keep it for me." And within the same bundle, a letter dated 1930, one replied, "The ribbon is still red, though I know you never touched it." No known living sibling linked the writers. In some cases, the child who had written the first letter was long buried by the time the response was dated. Local clergy called the trunk a forgery, though none could explain the authentic postmarks and seals. The orphanage ledger, brittle with age, recorded no such siblings, only solitary names. Yet in the margin of one page, beside a list of children lost to measles in 1902, someone had scrawled 3 words in faded ink: "Not lost, waiting." The trunk was eventually locked away in the county archives, but archivists admit the letters shift when left unsupervised, bundles rearranging as if answering some correspondence still ongoing. Those who linger too long in the room swear they hear the scratch of pencils on paper, a chorus of children's voices spelling names not yet spoken into the world. The archives close like any other government office. Lamps dimmed, ledgers stacked in careful towers, drawers locked with brass keys. Yet among the dust-heavy shelves of county courthouses and forgotten libraries lies a trail that refuses to settle. Burials that list 3 names for one grave. Photographs where children repeat themselves in the margins, blurred copies staring out with glassy eyes. Testimonies from midwives, doctors, priests, all hesitant, their pens pausing over words that strain against explanation. The official record presents these fragments with clerical indifference, but together they form a pattern no single historian dares endorse outright. In the dim back rooms of historical societies, curators speak of it in cautious tones. They call it multiplication, mirroring, borrowing of breath phenomena that suggest a life is not a solitary fact, but a divisible, repeatable thing. When pressed, they point to folklore, to the tendency of isolated communities to spin tales around tragedy, to see ghosts in the gaps of census columns. But privately, they admit the records are too consistent, too widespread, stretching across counties and decades. Families who carry the memory whisper a different truth. For them, it is not error, not superstition, but inheritance. They tell of children who spoke in unison before they could walk, of brothers who shared dreams as though swapping beds in the night, of daughters who mourned for siblings not yet born. The stories slip through generations, hushed but unforgotten. A cradle that rocked for 3 when only one child slept. A boy who returned doubled after being lost in the mines. A set of triplets who vanished into laughter during a carnival blackout. Each tale is anchored by a name, a place, a date written in ink on official paper. Closing the ledger does not close the matter. Archivists know this, though they do not say so aloud. They have seen the handwriting in margins where it should not be, entries amended long after the clerks were dead. They have felt the pulse of silence in reading rooms, the sense that someone small but numerous lingers just out of sight. When the records are locked away, something continues to tally them elsewhere, scratching unseen in the grain of the shelves. And so the ledger ends, but the pattern does not. Historians publish polite essays on rural myth, dismissing the anomalies as clerical mistakes. Families, meanwhile, keep counting. They count shadows, breaths, the soft doubling of footsteps in empty halls. They count not because they hope for answers, but because they know the truth lives in the numbers themselves. Inheritance is not only land or blood. It is the repetition of what should have ended, the multiplication of what should have been one. The ledger may close, but it does not balance.